My name is Ioana Tudor, and I'm the marketing head for Syngenta Crop Protection based in Basel. And I'll be very happy in the next couple of minutes to broaden the very interesting talks that we heard earlier this morning. And I'm going to talk about crop protection in the broader context. But before we do that, let's look at the number of questions that are worrying the farmers and us, which are so much more different than they were in the past. Before we were looking at how you get good crop, optimize the use of inputs and sell at good price. Now, society makes a big impact with the challenges on wanting to know where their crops are coming from, as well as residues. The trade and political wars are putting huge pressure on the agro food chain, not only on the crops, but also the ag input. Many of the ag inputs are global chains. And also the ability to manage the exports is really critical. So from a Syngenta perspective, we're going to work, and our commitment is to go beyond product innovation, beyond delivering and developing new chemistries, but also address biologicals, address the freedom to trade, and China. We heard already significant role that China plays as a purchaser of crops. They have 21% of the population, only 7% of the agricultural land, so they will remain a major importer. What wasn't said over the last 24 hours is how important is the role that China plays in the chemical supply chain as producer of active ingredients, raw materials, and intermediates. And then digital, which has already and will have even greater impact on agribusiness. So I'll start first on the crop protection innovation. And Eric showed this chart yesterday, which shows how fantastic was the innovation progress in our industry, from taking from few kilos per hectare to now grams per hectare, while not jeopardizing any of the efficacy. And in a country like Brazil, with tropical climate, bringing new innovation to the market is very much needed. And from a Syngenta perspective, you can see how fast it's the rate of refreshment in our portfolio. Here on the chart, on my right-hand side, it shows with orange how much of our innovation has been products that we launched in the last 5 years. And I want to show this chart that Camilla showed earlier in the panel. As a marketeer, this is great to have all these pipeline products coming through the market. And we're going to have more. She told you that we will launch 2 new active ingredients per year. What she didn't tell you, the entire industry today only launches 6 active ingredients per year. So very big ambition from Syngenta perspective. And if you would have seen this similar chart a few years back, you would have seen fewer bubbles and very big. We are accelerating to bring more products into the market, some more targeted by crop, pest, or geography. And this is needed to address a specific need, also because from a registrability perspective, it's harder and harder to register the billion-dollar blockbuster everywhere in the world. And this is high importance to keep in mind because the time to bring a product to market is very long. Again, Camilla didn't mention the timing. And the spend, $280 million is how much it takes from a discovery to bringing a chemical active ingredient to market. And if we would have looked only 5 years ago or 7 years ago, we would talk 150 million. And this is one of the reasons why we have seen the tremendous industry consolidation in the last couple of years. But bringing a new active ingredient to market is not enough. We need your help to work together to maximize the use of those products once we launch them. Resistance risk is huge, particularly here in Brazil because of tropical climate. And if we're not careful, we could lose technologies to develop the resistance in only a couple of years. And it takes Syngenta 15 years often to get the money back from one of those investments. And the ability for the industry to invent new modes of action is not as fast as Mother Nature challenge to overcome them. So mode of action rotation and good resistance management programs are critical. The other area is what I highlighted on the right-hand side. great technologies might have challenges if positioned in the difficult way, and we've seen this happening in Europe with a fantastic chemical class, the neonics, that have been removed from the market due to, first, industry not being proactive enough to develop stewardship measures for dust reduction. This became top agenda for the NGOs, and then now the neonics are banned. And we've seen already impact in a number of crops, particularly oilseed rape in some of the North European countries, where the planted acres decreased significantly because it's no longer attractive to grow some of those crops. Or we've seen derogations, but that's not a long-term usage. So we need to work together to protect those technologies because it takes so long to bring them to market. Chemical innovation, it's not going to be unique and sufficient. And from a Syngenta perspective, I'd like to highlight 3 additional technologies that will do a great job complementing the chemical innovation. Precision application. So it's becoming reality, and this will further contribute in reducing the amount of chemical applied per hectare, particularly in weed control, because it's the easiest to apply, weeds don't move. And the level of development technology makes it now commercially feasible, and potentially in European Union, this would be a solution to be able to keep some of the herbicides onto the market. Biocontrol is becoming increasingly important, especially in fruits and veg, to complement chemical sprays, particularly the last couple of sprays, to help reduce the residues. And there is already a number of options available, especially in segments like lab control. Syngenta is very active in the biological space, and we either have invested our own, we licensed in, we have a strategic alliance with DSM, or we bought companies. And in Brazil, we just launched last year a novel biological nematicide for seed treatment called Clariva. And then gene editing. We heard a very interesting coffee talk earlier in the plenary. This is a fantastic technology that gets the breeders very excited because it can allow them to bring native resistance into the plants and not necessarily compromise with yield. They've done that through traditional breeding for a long time, but now with this precision tool, the rate of success will be much higher. Key for this technology, as well as RNAi, will be how the regulators will look at it. And again, the concern that European Union is taking quite drastic stances to put gene editing in the GM category. And then speaking of EU, what's happening in EU has massive impact not only in that geography, but also outside. So this chart is really shocking. It shows the amount of active substances available to European grower from 1993 to today. And you see over 55% reduction. And this is not only the conventional, which is chemical, we have reduction in the other options as well. And these 2019, there are many in re-registration process. And we predict in worst case scenario as an industry, we might lose another 40 to 50% of the current commercial substances available. So Europe is moving to a very difficult agricultural setup with fewer and fewer tools available to the European growers and more expensive agriculture. The challenge is what we call EU contagion, because now Europe is imposing potential restrictions for crops that are being imported into Europe. Import tolerance and residue levels become highly important. And a company like Syngenta, we still find ourselves spending millions trying to defend and get import tolerance for products that have been banned in Europe to be able to secure freedom to trade. And the other area where we are working to support the growers is setting up tools such as EMAT, which I highlighted here. Eric mentioned yesterday the fruit quality contract, where we put together protocols of spray recommendations, and then we advise growers whether their crop will be exported in the target destination. And we have a number of pilots going for Europe. And then China. I mentioned how important is China for the chemical industry. It's one of the 3 major hubs where all the companies around the world are sourcing their ag inputs. chemicals. And Chinese government has encouraged over the last couple of decades big development of these chemical parks, which sometimes have 100 or 200 chemical factories next to each other with wide range of environmental standards. Syngenta suppliers, so we've been present in China for over 10 years. We have our own factories. We have strategic relationships with suppliers. So our suppliers have the highest standards available. However, when disaster like the one that happened a few months ago occur, the government reaction is to shut down an entire zone regardless of the environmental conditions in the different factories. So those companies that are best vertically integrated and have multiple sources, like Syngenta, will be able to manage the uncertainty in supply availability and supply security that exists in our chemical industry today. Our prediction is that this is not a blip, it's going to be a long-term trend, because the Chinese government is committed to increase the standards such that disasters like the one that just happened will not occur again. And Syngenta is expected to play a key role in lifting the standards for the entire industry. And then digital, so exciting. Things that we were just dreaming about a couple of years ago are reality. And things that we're just seeing in movies, actually now you can see in the field. And John Deere CEO told us yesterday how some of these innovations will be available in Brazil yet next year. And we've seen how big is the impact on what's happening in the farm. But digital is making fundamental impact for a company like Syngenta, where we have huge amounts of data. You heard this morning from Camilla how we are fundamentally changing the way we do research. When we were doing strategic workforce planning a few months ago and looking at the type of scientists we need in the future, we joked that actually now the interviews have to be done by both our IT and the science head, because the scientists have to be as good programmers as they are scientists. So things are moving extremely fast. And ability also to use the data to connect the value chain will be critical to address society concerns on sustainability. So to close, we are looking with the customers on the center of everything we do. These technology disruptors are here to make profound changes, both in the crop protection industry as well as seed industry. But we believe Syngenta is in a fantastic position. It's a great time to work at Syngenta because we're so well positioned to compete in the future. And we want to ride the innovation and technology change and potentially shape them. So I will pause here, and now we have a few opportunities for questions. And you have the app where you can put the questions either in English or in Portuguese, and the Portuguese ones my colleagues will help translate for me. And I will check them on my iPad. Okay, I'll start with the first one that just came in. I'm going to read the question and then attempt to provide the answer. So how do you expect traditional crop protection market to develop in different regions around the world, and why? And I shared some already. So European Union, what's happening now as we lose a lot of the actually new innovations, we go back to products that have been registered 40, 50 years ago. So actually, economy, agriculture is going backwards in European Union. We see very high rates of growth in Russia, Ukraine, as well as Africa, Middle East. We think it's going to be the next frontier, but very long term and still high risk. In LATAM, very fast adoption of technology because you need that from a tropical environment perspective. US was always going to remain high adopter of new technology, and first where we're going to try new products. And then the big wild card is what will happen in APAC and how fast China and India will reach the rates of evolution of what we've seen yesterday on the map. And we are building our businesses to be able to support the fast growth of crop protection industry in those markets. Okay. So I have another question back on China. What are the competitive advantage that Syngenta has now that it's part of ChemChina Group? So I already provided part of the answer from a chemical perspective, where with our now Chinese ownership, we can have potentially to work closer to try to influence the shaping of the regulatory system such way that it's open to the industry. The challenge for China is because it's so important for the rest of the world, whatever legislation decisions are made in China can have big impact outside. And today, for example, now they decided they don't want to accept the chemical regulatory data and product safety that has been developed in other parts of the world, which then would make it really difficult to bring innovation in China. But on the other hand, they require registration in China if you want to produce that active ingredient in China. So it's a vicious circle for the chemical industry. The other area that I think will make a huge impact is actually in the seed space. So seed space in China, you have 1,000 companies, very fragmented. They're on the verge of discussing adoption of GM crops, which can completely change the shape in crops like corn. And China could look very much like the US. So from a crop protection perspective, we're gearing up the portfolio to think how we will be ready to respond when China agriculture will modernize and increase the technology adoption, which is expected. That's actually the #1 reason why ChemChina bought Syngenta. So I think these are actually tremendous area of competitive advantage that now we can reap the benefits going forward. Okay, that's a really good question and one of my preferred ones. Why the innovation takes so long to reach the Brazilian market? I wish it would take much shorter because Brazil, it's such an important part of our global business. Any of the bubbles that you've seen on the chart, a big chunk is related to Brazil sales. The challenge is it takes so long to take regulatory approval in Brazil. And we heard from Anvisa yesterday that hopefully the government will work to shorten that timeline. The way we try to respond from an industry perspective is as soon as the products are ready to be tested, we try to bring them for field testing in Brazil and initiate field trialing and profiling as early as possible. The challenge is it's really hard to accelerate that even further versus the rate that we do right now. So sometimes we might test in parallel 2-3 different options before we narrowed what will be the compound that will be progressing registration. And that's also a big challenge from a resource and field management perspective. But Brazil is so critical for us and the rest of the industry that if we can work together to shrink the regulatory approval processes, this would make a huge impact. And there is no reason to reinvent the wheel and start re-looking at the data, especially if the product has been already under review in places like US and Canada. I heard Anvisa yesterday also referring EU as a potential model to go after. My recommendation is maybe stay away from EU and look after US and Canada as regulatory systems to connect with. Okay, we have time for one more question. So, all the products take 15 years to return investments for the company? No, of course not. Because if that would be the case, we would be very in difficult shape financially, especially given that some products take so much longer to register in some parts of the world. Especially the smaller bubbles that we call agile. The idea is we develop them faster, they're more targeted, we can go very fast to the target market, and potentially we shrink the entire cycle. The other way is we don't have a not invented here syndrome. We are working very closely with smaller companies, many coming out of Japan or some other parts of the world where innovation is really fast in the research space, and license some of those products in. And in that case, again, the return on investment is much faster. So there are very different models. We also work in co-developing. You're going to see a lot more co-development in the industry where we work with our competitors, being Corteva, being Bayer. Why? Because the amount is getting bigger and bigger, the risk is higher and higher, and if you co-develop, you could potentially share both the risk, but of course then you share the available market. But increasingly that's one way to mitigate this very, very long time it takes to get the money back on innovation. And remember, we need to design now and think about what will be the regulatory environment or the pest need in 8, 10, 12, 15 years when the product will be fully commercial in the market. It requires very, very strong crystal ball to be able to accomplish that. So the more we can spread our risks, the better we can manage the pipeline. And that's my role from a commercial perspective, to work with our team in research. Thank you very much.